So guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about things that no one has ever told you before about the marathon. Let's get into it. Okay, so like always, I did come across an article to talk to you guys about on the video. And this week, like a lot of weeks, I found an article on Outside Online, and the article is titled 8 Things No One Tells You About Marathons. Pretty compelling so far, eh? Okay, now to be right up front, if you have already run a marathon, maybe you've run a couple of marathons, these might be things that you've heard before. Maybe no one's told you, but you've probably found out for yourself. So if you have heard of these things before, just suspend your disbelief, pretend it's the first time you're hearing about it, or better yet, share this video with someone that hasn't run a marathon, because these are the people that it's really going to benefit. Okay, so number one, the first thing that no one tells people about marathons is that packet pickup and pre-race parking requires more planning than you might think. And I know that this probably depends on what marathon you're actually running. So let's just say you're running a world marathon major, and there's a lot of people there. I mean, it doesn't have to be a marathon major. It could be any marathon that is just enormous. And obviously when there's a lot of people coming to run your race, the logistics are just going to be just a bit more challenging. But as far as packet pickup goes, let's think about those world marathon majors where people are flying in from all over the world to run this race. And with all these people are all the vendors and all the events that are going on. So it's not just packet pickups, everything surrounding like the race prep, getting ready to go and run. And my friends, you have to have a plan. Or if you have a plan, you have to be prepared to throw that plan out the window because you're going to be doing a lot of walking. And I think the idea behind this about realizing that packet pickup takes a bit of time, and of course pre-race parking, but I think the idea behind it is that you're probably going to be on your feet more than is ideal. Now, personally, I have long ago put that aside because when I go to a big race, I have to assume I'm going to be on my feet for longer than would be ideal, right? Just because there's so much stuff I want to do. And I kind of think that actually going to these races and walking around and seeing everything and maybe doing a shakeout run or 2 or 3 shakeout runs, as well as seeing all the vendors and seeing all the other runners, I think that's part of the appeal of doing these bigger races. I mean, especially for me, because I'm probably filming and I'm trying to get some good content to bring to you, but still, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth potentially not running your very best time at some of these bigger races so you can walk around and, be part of the festivities. But if that isn't for you, if you are going for a PR, then you really have to pay attention to it and maybe have a plan to get in, get your packet and get out, get back to the hotel, get back home. Of course, if you're running like a small local marathon, this probably isn't going to be an issue. I know here in Florida, at least, there are loads of marathons all over the place. And sometimes the packet pickup is as small as just walking into a local running store and picking up your packet. Like, not a big deal. But the big races, they do require a bit of planning. So new runners beware. The second thing that no one tells us about marathons is that there is so much Gatorade. Now, it doesn't actually have to be Gatorade. It can be Scratch, Goo, Noon. Insert your sports drink of choice, except at the Berlin Marathon where there was just like an overabundance of water and really no sports drink. Well, I guess they did have some Morton mix, but it wasn't a crazy amount. Like, I was looking for it a lot of times and I couldn't find it. But anyway, at most marathons, especially here in the United States, the races are going to be serving up Gatorade. And look, if you're not used to training with Gatorade, it can be a bit of a surprise, a bit of shock to the system. And even if it's not a shock to the system in the start, by the end of running a marathon, it can really get to be a bit too much. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is because you just get bored of it, right? That sickly glucose sweet drink just doesn't taste as good at the end of a marathon as it does at the beginning. But also, and I found this a few times, oftentimes the volunteers are mixing the Gatorade and they're using a powder and they're adding water. And it seems like they don't follow the same recipe. So sometimes I will get to an aid station and the Gatorade will be like nice and watery, like well watered down so it doesn't seem overly sweet. And then other times, the exact opposite. It's like a sickly sweet mess in my mouth. And that just gets worse as the race goes on. Also, Gatorade has sodium, so sometimes it can leave you feeling a little more thirsty than when you actually had it. And also, well, we talked about, going to the loo in our last video last week. And if you have a sensitive stomach, sometimes all that Gatorade can really do a number on you. So actually, I don't know how we fix this. A lot of us don't drink Gatorade unless we're at races. I fall into that camp. But I suppose I should tell you that, you should probably find out what your race is going to be serving and then ideally train with it. Do I think you're going to do that? No. But in an ideal world, that's probably what we should do. The third thing that no one tells you about running a marathon is that it is possible, believe it or not, that you're going to get caught up in running other people's paces. And I have fallen prey to this more times than I can count. When you get to a marathon and you're all tapered and you're feeling just fantastic and you just want to go. And because you're so rested and you've eaten well and hopefully you've been sleeping well before the race, all of a sudden it's like, where did these running skills come from? I feel like I could run so much faster than I ever did in training. And then you're running running, you make friends with people around you, and all of a sudden you see someone and they're running just a slightly faster pace, and you think, yeah, I'm gonna hold on to this person. And you know what? I know it's 20 seconds faster than I really wanted to start this marathon, but I'm feeling good. And I would love a nice big fat PR. Guys, don't fall for it. It's a trap. So don't get caught up with other people's paces. If you haven't heard it yet today, let me be the one to tell you, run your own race. And if you have been training, if you have been appropriately training for the marathon, you kind of have an idea what pace you're going to be running at. So let that person go and fall back, stay within yourself, stick to the training, and you know what's likely going to happen? I bet you're going to catch up to that person towards the end of the race because they were also running too fast. They were latching on to the pace of the person in front of them and they blew up. And now you are going to blow by them and finish better than you would if you had started too fast. Number 4, we've already talked about Gatorade and drinks and how they sort of taste horrible at the end of a race just because you've been having so much. Well, this may come as a surprise, or maybe not, because it's actually pretty much the same thing. But your favorite gels can also start to taste pretty disgusting towards the end of a race. And I tell you, for the longest time, and I mean years, I was using goo gels. And I liked goo because I liked all the flavors. You know what? Chocolate mint was my favorite. But I would try every goo. I just liked all the flavors. It kind of made my race more exciting. Like I would look forward to running and I'd be watching my watch because I knew that every 40 minutes that passes, I can take another goo. And I just loved how they taste and I just loved all the flavors. And I loved planning or surprising myself, like which one was I going to have when I reached into my pocket and grabbed it out. Now, I don't remember when exactly it happened, but it definitely happened, and I got sick of it. I got sick of goo gels. I got sick of the consistency. I got sick of the flavors. And if you had told me like the race before or the 10 races before, I wouldn't have believed you for a second. So don't think it can't happen to you. But guys, after your training, after you've had a lot of these gels, they might not always taste as good as they do at the beginning of the race. So I don't know, maybe mix things up. I know for the last couple of years, I've been using Morton gels, and while they don't taste particularly good, they kind of taste like nothing. Like I neither like them or I dislike them. And I think that ambivalence is exactly what I'm looking for in a gel. So I hope that, I don't get turned off of Morton gels, but if it happens, I won't be surprised. Number five, something that no one ever tells these marathoners, especially these new marathoners, is that you might want to cry. But it's important to save the tears for the finish line, because at the finish line, it doesn't really matter. Like you can sit back and enjoy all the feels coming to you. If you've seen any of my race videos, you know that has happened to me in the past several times. But a lot of runners are caught off guard when they get struck with the feels in the middle of the race. And this isn't totally abnormal, right? I mean, it's somewhat to be expected. Studies have shown that sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion can affect the amygdala. And the amygdala, as you know, is an essential part of regulating emotion. So when you're in the race and you've been running maybe for a couple hours, that extreme fatigue can lower the threshold for crying. Okay, so what do you do if this actually happens? Well, I don't know. I think it's one of these things that are easier said than done, but try and save your tears to the finish line, right? We don't need to be expending any more unnecessary moisture, because if we do, we may have to take more Gatorade, and that could also lead to more stomach problems. It's a vicious circle. Anyway, just look. Do what you can. We're not going to shame anyone for crying. So if you want to stop in the middle of a race and have a good cry, then, so be it. But if you can, kind of push back at least until the finish line. It'll be much more satisfying when you don't have to keep running after you've had a good cry. The sick thing that no one tells marathoners is that, let me tell you what we do tell new marathoners, or marathoners in general. You're probably going to hit the wall. But here's the thing. You can hit the wall more than once. And you know the wall. I mean, I guess the wall can be a couple different things, but technically when we're talking about hitting the wall, we're talking about when we run out of glycogen and we physically run out of energy. But there are other walls. There are mental walls, mental barriers. So you might just be getting tired, like mentally tired from focusing on your race pace. Or you might actually hit the wall. I mean, like the glycogen wall. And then sometimes you can have something to drink, you can have a gel, hopefully not a gel that's going to make you feel sick, but you can have a gel and maybe you get like a second wind. But I tell you, just around the corner is the possibility of a second wall, and maybe even a third. In fact, I know, back in the day, I used to think of the marathon as kind of like a straight line, and then there would be like wiggles like this. And as the race went on, those waves would get closer together, and the crests of those waves were indicating difficulty. So I might run very easy for, say, 16, 17, 18 miles, and then I would hit a wave and things would get very difficult. And then sometimes it just goes away and you feel like you could run forever again. That's a fantastic feeling when it happens. When it does happen, I want you to cherish that moment. Like, remember how bad you felt and how good you're feeling at the moment, because that's an important lesson to learn, that things never always get worse. That's the saying, right? Okay, but things sometimes do get worse, right? And those things that get worse are sometimes in the form of a second wall or a second wave of difficulty. I don't think that just because you've hit one, it's over for the rest of the race. Like if you start feeling good, it could happen again. But here's the thing, when it happens again, you already know that you can get over it. And that's probably one of the most important things that a runner can learn. Now, if you ever go into ultra marathon running, you're going to be very well acquainted with that waveform of like difficulty and ease. But it can certainly happen in a marathon. The seventh thing that people don't tell new marathoners, and you know, I kind of feel like, or I don't remember when I actually heard this. Of course, I've been running for a long time now, and I don't think we had the same amount of information when I started running marathons. But you would think when you get to the end of a marathon, you're going to be exhausted. Like you're going to be thirsty, you're going to be hungry, like especially if you've been eating these gels that are making you feel sick, you're going to want some real food. And that's not the case. Now, trust me, that hunger after running a marathon, it will come. You will feel ravenous, but it's not going to be right away. And that can be a little tricky, especially when it comes to recovery. Because after you have run a marathon and you've stopped running, you really need to get that recovery kick-started right away. And how do we do that? Well, you know, we stop running, that's a pretty key component to it, but also eating and drinking. But because running can suppress the hormones that trigger hunger, you may not feel like it. In fact, you probably won't feel like it. So you're going to have to get over that feeling of not feeling like eating and just eat something. And I'm telling you, it's easier said than done. But I highly encourage you to do it, even though, do I always do it? No, sometimes I just give in to not wanting to eat and I'll just eat whenever I feel like it later on. That's less than ideal. Don't do what I do. Do as I say. Okay, so now I'm going to read this right off the screen so I get it right for you. But when it comes to refueling, according to the Gatorade Sports Science Institute, runners are supposed to eat at least 1.2 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight per hour for the first hour after a race for optimal recovery. Okay, so let me just find my phone and do a quick calculation. So if I weigh 82 kilograms or times that by 1.2, that's 98.4 grams of carbohydrates in the first hour. Now, I also just looked up how many grams of carbohydrates are in a banana and it told me 27. So someone like me would have to eat around 3.5 bananas in the first hour after a marathon in order to get the appropriate amount of carbohydrates back in our body. Of course, I think there are easier ways to get in those carbohydrates than 3.5 bananas, but I wanted to make it sound, you know, more difficult than it really is. I suppose a bagel would probably have more grams of carbohydrate, but you know, there's also chocolate milk and that's pretty good too. And I think that would go down a lot easier than 3 bananas. Anyway, finally, the eighth thing that people don't tell runners before they run a marathon is that your immune system is going to take a hit after the race. So if this is the first time you're hearing this, listen, if you get sick after you have run a marathon, just don't be surprised. It is somewhat normal. And that's because much like running a marathon and it suppresses those hunger hormones, the stress of training, everything leading up to the marathon and then the big event creates a huge amount of stress on your body. And all that stress actually suppresses your immune system. And that's why we get sick after a race. Of course, there's a lot of other factors that go into it too. Like if you're traveling for a race, you might be sitting on a plane with a bunch of sick people. And because your immune system is lower, you know, you're more likely to pick up the sniffles. But you don't have to be traveling in order to get sick. If your immune system has been compromised because you've been training to run a marathon, you know, you're probably going to pick up anything, you know, from going to the shops, you know, pushing a trolley and, you know, licking the handle. Just doing the things we do on a daily basis can get you sick. And get this actually happens to 1 in 7 runners. So if we take my most recent race, the Berlin Marathon, 53,000 runners, that means that 7,500 people got sick after that race. That's not fun. In fact, all these things haven't really been fun. But look, if you haven't run a marathon and you're watching this video with like the intent of trying to get some insight into what's really going to happen, like everything we've talked about today, pretty miserable, isn't it? But you know what? It's totally worth it. I mean, getting sick really isn't worth it. I actually got sick after the Berlin Marathon this year. And I gotta say, it hasn't been pleasant, but it wouldn't change anything. I mean, I probably wouldn't lick the handles of the trolleys at the supermarket, but most everything else I wouldn't change. So yeah, that's 8 things. That's 8 things that no one tells marathoners. Are there any more? If there are, let me know in the comments. And if you have made it to this point in the video, we've talked about shopping carts and licking handles, so why don't you drop the shopping cart emoji? Is there even one? I haven't even checked. If there is one, drop that in the comments just to let me know that you've made it to this point in the video. And with that, it's Matt B. This has been a video on things that no one tells marathoners before they do a marathon. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.